Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are well. My name is Jessie Wild, and I am going to be your chair for this webinar all about taking on complex sites, planning and building regulations for MMC. So just a little bit of admin before we get going. This is being live streamed on YouTube, and if you do have any Q&A, please do drop it in the chat on the YouTube channel, and those questions will wind their way to me, and I will be able to pose them to the panel as we go. We are hosting this. We are the Housing Festival, the Bristol Housing Festival. And if you've not heard of us, the Bristol Housing Festival is working in the city of Bristol to support innovation in building, particularly when it comes to MMC. We all know and are aware of the challenges that we face as a country, let alone as a city, when it comes to the climate crisis, the ecological emergency, the skills shortages, as well as a housing crisis and the affordability of housing as we know it. MMC is not, never will be a silver bullet that's going to solve all of our problems and our challenges, but there is an opportunity when it comes to MMC. There's to start to look at how we tackle these challenges. MMC asks us to rethink some of the big questions when it comes to things like planning, which we're going to talk about today, but as well as things like design and manufacturing and things like that. So it provides a bit of an opportunity when it comes to delivering of houses to rethink some of the things that we've always just taken for granted. So one of our key priorities as the Housing Festival is to showcase and celebrate really good examples of MMC. And so I'm delighted that we have such like an amazing panel actually today that are coming from all different areas and spheres of the development process that will be able to speak into MMC, particularly when it comes to planning and the opportunities and challenges that MMC provides. So this webinar, just so you know, is part of a series. It's part of our Workforce for the Future project, and it is the Workforce for the Future project is specifically designed to support SMEs to gain exposure and experience with MMC. So we're working with a company called YTKO and with Moby to deliver this project, and the aim really is, as I say, to help SMEs that are in the built environment to bridge the gap in their skills between trad build and MMC, modern methods of construction, to help future-proof the workforce. MMC is coming, it is happening within the UK, and actually there's a real danger that for some people, if they're not able to engage with it or don't have the skills to engage with it, that there could be a bit of a shortage there. So do follow the links that will be on this YouTube channel, and they're also all over the Bristol Housing Festival website, because there is an opportunity to engage further with the Workforce for the Future programme, which includes paid for training, grants and funding. So it's worth exploring that if you are an SME in the built environment and interested in upskilling around modern methods of construction. But anyway, almost enough from me. I just want to kind of introduce the topic really. So as I said, we know that MMC provides challenges as well as opportunities when it comes to addressing planning and building regulations. But this is really exciting because it is a really a range of opportunities that comes with this. So in this webinar, we're going to start to explore that. And I'm delighted to introduce a range of speakers. And I won't go around the room now and introduce them, but I will let them each introduce themselves as we go through. I'm going to hand over to each of the speakers in turn, who will give us sort of a 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes intro into kind of who they are, what they're about, their sort of positioning statement, as it were. And then we will start a bit of a conversation between us about the opportunities and challenges that MMC provides, particularly around planning and complex sites. So this is very much enough from me now. So I'm going to hand over to start with to Gary Collins. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you, Jessie. I'll now nervously share my screen, see if it all works. So bear with me, then I'll introduce myself once I've got the first slide up and running. Bear with me. So hopefully you can see that okay. Can you see that, Jessie? My first slide?
Absolutely, yeah. We can, yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, so yes, welcome everyone. Yeah, my name's Gary Collins. I'm the Head of Development Management at Bristol City Council. So I oversee the service that deals with all the planning applications within the city. And so this is a very brief reflection on our involvement with MMC. We've been involved with the Housing Festival from a very early stage, working with Jesse and colleagues. That's really helped us work with the various initiatives, including MMC, that are coming through that as well. So we dealt with a number of planning applications, and a number of them are now built out. So it's been a very kind of rich experience in that, really. We had visibility of these schemes coming through from day one, which really helped. Nonetheless, though, there's nothing like getting your hands dirty with the schemes themselves. So there is some sort of brief reflections on our experience with that as well now. So hopefully you can see the second slide. So it's then progressing fine. So I've put these into two categories, really, on allocated sites and also opportunity sites. So a couple of allocated sites I'll talk very briefly about. This first one is in South Bristol. It's a unused bit of open space. You can see from the kind of the long nature of it, it's sort of a difficult site to develop. We're squeezed between an existing major road, existing housing, and then it has a brook through it as well. So very difficult site. So other things had to be put in place to make it developable, but it's very clear to see in terms of how the application came in, and then from my subsequent visit to site when they were halfway through the build, the MMC can clearly accelerate delivery on site, and the site manager was very proud in saying how quickly they were building the whole site out, really. So it was good to hear that, because obviously delivery on the ground is a real kind of key factor for us in the planning service as well, in terms of our housing delivery challenges. We were aware, and this came through in the application, that there were some inherent challenges in terms of the modular approach. So there can be some limitations in what materials are available. This was an area sort of with a lot of red brick, so the development had to relate to that, and also layout issues as well, especially given the linear nature of the site, the fact that flats were being proposed as well. So when it came to dealing with issues like being either exclusively south or north facing, or dealing with single aspect issues, there were clearly some limitations in the MMC product that we just had to kind of understand and get to grips with, really, and try and kind of moderate our approach to those issues and make compromises. So, understanding that from day one did help. And in particular, I think in terms of the materials that can be used in MMC, I think it can deliver high quality, which is important to us, and it can be quite convincing. So this picture here on the top right-hand corner is a picture I took on site, which shows the facing material for this kind of brick development that you can see in front of you. You can see it's not actual brick, of course, but it is, when you look at it on site, it is very convincing, and I think it is high quality. So that's just a little dip into a bit of detail on that one there. The second site that I just want to briefly talk about, and I think one of my fellow speakers is going to be talking about this one as well, is again another very difficult site. This one sandwiched between the A4 Bath Road, another road, bridge, and the River Avon as well. Very challenging site. And I think a key lesson learnt from this is that having to kind of face the reality of what might happen on site compared to some of the things that you see at the application stage, such as in design and access statements. So you get sent in a DNA statement quite seductive images of the development, and I think the development is living up to that now as it's being built on site, but some detailed elements can change through the MMC requirements. And I think reflection on that is that I think if we can all discuss what the method of construction is going to be and some of the implications at an early stage, it can help us not only just in dealing with the application, but also those subsequent approval stages, such as discharge of conditions. And certainly something in Bristol we want to pursue is something called a design intent statement, which can help all parties reach a level agreement to allow the permission to be granted, but whilst also setting out a design code that's deliverable for the development going forward, and allowing condition discharges to kind of work through more quickly than otherwise. moving quickly on to then the kind of the opportunity sites that come about. So this is a product called Z Pods that you may be aware of, and I know a number of sites were being looked at for this, mainly car parks, because the benefits is that you can build houses above existing airspace, above car parks, and so this was the site chosen. And I think one of the issues around this is that, I mean, not all sites will be a good location for this kind of development, but this was a good site because it was adjacent to a major high street here in East Bristol, next to one of our major parks as well, not too far away from other housing as well. So whilst it was in the middle of a car park, it's actually really well connected to the local community and essential services as well. And this is it built out here, and you can see the car park is still very usable, and it works really well. And certainly when we took this to our development control committee, they did have some reservations about people living in the middle of a car park, but they were assured that there were support services on site and also nearby, and we look forward to taking them to the site now that everything's freed up, so they can see, I think, what a success the scheme has been. And then the final thing I just wanted to do was just conclude with some of the key learning points that we've found out through the development management process. Number one, the MMC clearly can accelerate delivery on site, so we've got to embrace it as a method of delivering housing on sites. But it's really important that we have those early conversations about MMC on particular sites and what the inherent limitations are, what that can mean for some of the issues that we need to discuss before we can grant permission. And then again, I would plug the role of design intent again at an early stage. If we can agree those parameters early on, we can speed up not only the planning process in terms of granting planning permission, but also those follow-on discharge of conditions. So it's a really quick fly through. I'll hand over now. Back to Jessie.
Thank you so much, Gary. I'm not going to say too much, only in as much as to hand over to Trina, if you'd like to introduce yourself and then take it away. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Jessie. As she said, my name is Trina and I'm Project Director of Building Better, and I'm here to give you the Building Better perspective on the opportunities and challenges when it comes to this question of tackling complex sites. So let me first start by telling you what Building Better is. We're an alliance of 30 housing associations and local authorities building high quality sustainable homes using MMC. We built a pipeline over 1,000 units. We have 2 procurement routes for our members to buy these homes. And collaboration has been at the heart of everything we've done, whether it be agree a high level specification, being prepared to genuinely listen to manufacturers and then implement what we're hearing, as well as creating a contracting environment that allows all parties to share in the risks and the rewards. So my normal audience is usually made up of housing associations and local authorities. So I thought I'd first share 3 thoughts for them before turning to what I think will be most relevant for construction SMEs. First of all, when it comes to planning and building regulations for complex sites, what my members are saying to me is that one of the hardest things to tackle is perception. Many of the sites that are complicated for MMC are equally tricky for traditional for lots of different reasons. But the 2 issues where MMC poses an additional complexity is often look and feel and accessibility, 2 of the things I think Gary kind of brought up in some of those sites he walked through just earlier. The second point, based on member feedback, is that even with these 2 issues, maybe things are more nuanced and perhaps less of a deal breaker than some of their internal new business teams initially believed before putting sites through planning. So when it comes to look and feel, just like we saw in some of those pictures, there are more options today than there were even 2 years ago. And then when it comes to logistics, there are sites that are difficult to get to, but just because they're tricky for modular, for example, doesn't mean that other forms of MMC can't or won't work there. A colleague of mine just said to me yesterday, it's as if for MMC to work, you need to have a perfectly flat piece of land next to a motorway, which of course we know isn't true. The only way to find out whether a scheme will work is to do a low barrier to entry assessment, which our members and manufacturers are getting pretty good at doing. So that brings me to my third point, which is that our members are saying that the most important thing that they can do with these kind of more complex, tricky sites is to enable is for us, rather, Building Better to enable conversations between them and manufacturers at the really early stage to determine either way whether a scheme is a goer or not, even before you get to the point of planning. And kind of we set about to do this at no cost or commitment for the housing association to make it simple on their side, and on the manufacturer's side, provide some certainty through pipeline, fixed costs, as well as highly encouraging the use of a pre-construction services agreement. So even where there is risk, it's transparent and everyone's signed up to it on the same page. So I'll quickly turn to the construction SMEs, the 3 points again here, which I think might be most interesting. And it's more, I think it's more sort of questions and areas of opportunity rather than sort of, kind of key areas of insight or takeaway. The first, again, is around perception that MMC may de-skill the construction industry, but actually my members are saying to me that that's not their sense. Their sense is that skilled employees will be absolutely critical to growth in this sector. It will just be in a kind of more controlled environment. The second point is the role of consultants. It's a question that we're asking ourselves quite a lot about. Employers, agents, architects, clerks of works, a sense that some of the intel and the lessons learned on projects going through planning aren't coming back to the organisation. So we need to find a way at Building Better how to harness that feedback in a way to drive both the process and the designs to keep getting better over time. And one last point, something that keeps coming up a lot, don't have a good answer for, is heat pumps, installers and repairers. I'd say 70% of our pipeline being assessed for viability by manufacturers at the moment is to be built to net zero carbon in operation. So that gives you a feel for the sort of appetite. And as we've stipulated no gas, there's a kind of latent concern around how the sector is going to be able to install and maintain this tech in the short term, and obviously all of the implications that has for regulation and planning as well. I'll stop there and hand back over to Jessie.
Thank you so much, Trina. That's brilliant. I'm going to hand now to Richard. Please will you introduce yourself and then take us away.
Thank you, Jessie. So my name's Richard Quarry. I'm a partner at Ryder Levitt Bucknell, covering both Bristol and Cardiff offices. Quite lucky, actually, over a number of years working as employer's agent and QS on a wide variety of schemes, involved in a lot of MMC modular housing projects, which I think has been interesting to see I suppose how things change now, how things are developing, which has been really good. I think my take on complex sites, and I'm going to be the prophet of doom here and talk about cost, which does need to be talked about in terms of when you look at viability. So I think if you look at the cost base of your standard modular stroke MMC scheme, in a market that is, I guess, at the moment, very confined by cost and material price rises anyway, you're looking at probably around 20 to 25% increase when you start looking at MMC stroke modular, especially full modular. You can be easily post £3,000 a metre square. Now, what we've seen is on a complex project, that can be higher. The key to saving cost is to ensure standardisation. And I suppose on confined sites or complex sites, that isn't always the case. And by standardisation, I mean a certain number of house types, a certain avoidance steps and staggers, and all the things then that, going back to the previous speaker, when you look at engaging with the MMC suppliers, all the things they say don't do, because that increases cost. So we've done a piece of work on a number of schemes where we've looked at that, trying to standardise stuff. The flip side of that, of course, is going back to the planners with it. And what they do not want to see generally is uniformity. So it's this mismatch between the two. So in order to reduce cost and ensure viability, you need to standardise. So that's where our architectural and design friends come in really, along with the suppliers and the contractors as well, to try and make the product look and feel different, I suppose, to what it really is. So you're trying to create a non-standard product from a standard product in order to reduce cost base. So I would say that's probably the opening shot in terms of complex sites, is trying to maintain that cost base. Moving on from that as well, sometimes on complex sites, you look at height. When you look at height, then from an MMC perspective, that then starts to restrict some of your options, especially modular as well. So you then, fire, acoustics, etc. And we've explored all of this, looking at timber solutions on sort of 10-story schemes and all the rest. But you do limit your options. Again, that then starts to increase cost, which then affects viability. So that's another side of it. I think harking back to the point regarding building regs, we know building reg changes are imminent. The good thing with MMC and modular systems is inherently, because they're factory produced, then your air loss, your air tightness, all of that, and I guess your insulation properties, it is much, much better than your typical site-built product. So, to my mind, building reg changes inextricably push yourself more towards MMC and modular anyway, for that very reason. When you look at some of the SAP cuts you get just off a standard MMC product, they're not far off zero carbon anyway. We recently had a scheme where we went a long way down the road through planning, actually. And then actually the SAP cuts have come out so good at stage 3+/4 design stage, the client made the decision on our advice to actually then go for a zero carbon. And it was never meant to be, but we were that close. And I think that added something like 2% to the overall build cost of the scheme. So I think MMC is inextricably linked to that. And I think is very well prepared for the building reg changes when they come in. I think if you look at some of the wider, I suppose, issues around complex sites, some of the slides that were shown in the first presentation, if you've got a tight site, you don't have material laydown areas. So by the very virtue of that, then MMC, just-in-time delivery, I suppose works very well for that. Sloping sites are another consideration. So if you're looking at a complex site in that context, now what do you do with MMC on that? Certainly timber frame is not best suited to sloping sites, and it's just what you do then with the site. Do you lift levels? So there's all these other considerations. If you're doing that then there's a planning issue. If you're looking at eaves heights, it all goes round in circle. But ultimately, coming back to viability and cost. And I suppose, without sounding, as I say, too much like the prophet of doom in terms of cost, there are opportunities equally as well that we're seeing with MMC on a wider but also local level. We're working in the city with a charity who are undertaking schemes in the rear gardens of council houses in the south of the city. And this is a fantastic scheme because what that's actually now looking at is a factory within the locality that's going to employ local people then to build the timber panels, then it'll fulfill the house programme going forward. So, that in itself is an opportunity. It allows economic regeneration at a very local level. Programme savings were mentioned as well. We see that, although I do believe there's an element of inertia in terms of contractors and developers actually giving back the full programme saving. And I think that probably goes down to supply chains, and perhaps it's the lack of use of some of these systems. But once that increases, then I think we start to see even more programme saving. I think the key thing is getting the watertight, and obviously that then is beneficial in terms of payment stages and all the rest of it that some of our clients look for as well. So that's really it from me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Richard. That's really good to hear. I'm going to come to you, Dave, next, please. Do introduce yourself and then take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name's Dave Merrills. I'm the Operations Director for Mid Group. Mid Group are a specialist MMC contractor. We don't shoehorn ourselves to one specific type, manufacturer or methodology. However, we do have a scheme in Bristol. I wasn't going to share a slide, but I thought it'd be quite opportune to share one of our pictures if possible. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Probably I won't be able to do that. So we're working on Bath Road. It's a scheme which I'm sure everybody in Bristol knows. It's just outside of Tottenham Bridge. It's a 17-storey tower with a 7, 6 and a 3-storey building built in between. The choices we have for this site were very limited. The site in itself is 2,000 square metres. And on there, we've managed to develop 152 1, 2 and 3 bed apartments. So it's swathed on the side of a River Avon, and it actually cantilevers over in certain areas over the tidal river. And we're trapped in between the edge of the A4. So by no means have we got motorway running at the side of us so we can have our deliveries. However, it has been quite complex. So restrictions on site was we had to deliver 152 units. It's a full affordable scheme. So there are 86 affordable rental units and 66 shared ownership. It was constrained by the river, the A4 and the story height. So I had to come up with some clever ways of how to get 2 apartments side by side. So which included developing a cantilever podium structure, which would not have been able to do if we had not developed it in an MMC methodology. So the methodology we chose was a concrete panel. This comes to site, complete with brick slips, concrete out panel, A1 combustible, non-combustible insulation in internal, and an internal concrete leaf, which is pre-painted and has all the mechanical and electrical installations already fitted. It comes from its development side with windows installed and balconies are installed. So we have a big panel, comes up back of a lorry, we pick it up with a crane, we drop it into place, we bolt it together, fill it with grout, then we move up floor by floor by floor. So what this does, this increases the area that we can do per day and the speed of build. On the tower, on 17 stories, we was building that roughly 1 week per floor. We had conversations earlier about speed, program, cost. So waterproofing is very easy on the tower. Every 3rd floor, we put a sacrificial waterproof layer on. So we've got a total sterile environment below where we're working. That enables our traditional fit out guys to come in. So although it's MMC, it's not a one-stop shop fits all. It creates a very airtight, thermally efficient envelope whilst maintaining the internal fit-out trades to come in and build as usual. So we have dry liners, we have plasterers, we have M&E guys, we have screeders. So all of the elements and skills that we already have, we utilise in the scheme. So there we go. So I'd love to show you a picture, but unfortunately we can't. But this entire building is quite strange for Bristol, and it was quite complicated to explain to the planning authority when we were starting, because I think the developers before we won the scheme came along and didn't explain. So when I was talking to planners and said, right, I'm going to build a 17-story tower with no scaffolding, they were like, well, how are you going to do that, Dave? Because you have to lay bricks off the scaffolding. So no, the bricks are already on the slips. So I did quite a lot of work with the planning with Susanna and the team to show them some presentations of how it all worked. So the scheme's come together quite nicely now. The towers, everything's finished, and we're just in the fit out phase. So there we go. That's Bath Road in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, David. We have now enabled your screen sharing. So if you wanted to show the picture just before we move on to Elle, then you may.
That must be sharing.
It is coming up now.
There we go.
There we are.
So there we go, as we discussed quite quickly. So the cantilevered walkway there is actually not founded on the banks of the River Avon. That was not allowed by the EA, with it being a tidal river. We have any special permits to work within 16 metres of the edge of the banks. So this is all cantilevered over the river, and Bath Road is just at the far side there. That's another slight picture. So this shows you how tight it really is. So we have one laydown area for lorries there, which Bristol City Council were amazing. The highways team, I can't speak highly enough of them. If they hadn't worked with us and cooperated, we could never have built the scheme. So as you look, and Richard mentioned earlier, laydown areas on tight sites are just non-existent. We don't have any laydown areas. So all our material comes just in time and goes into a building. We have 3 hoist locations. And there we go, it's sat on the edge of a bank, as you can see. And as Richard was also saying, that it's very complicated, having tiered sites that aren't particularly level. Well, this has 3 floors, it has 3 levels. We have a commercial level at lower ground, then we have a car park area, then above there we have apartments, and then above there we had to cantilever over. What you can probably just pick up in this point where the cursor is, that is a 4.5 metre cantilever on a podium structure, which happens on both sides of the building. And this is the largest cantilever structure in Europe. So we've had to devise this to get the volume to make as the site be viable for 152 units. So as you can see, MMC is obviously the solution for this type of project. There we
Brilliant.
go.
Thank you so much, David. That's really good. Elle, let me come to you next. Do introduce yourself and then take it away. Elle, you're muted.
There we go, sorted out eventually. Sorry, my name's Elle George. I'm a civil and environmental engineer and the founding director of Elevate. And I founded Elevate last year because, frankly, I was sick of change not happening fast enough and in the belief that we need to build in a new way. And Elevate's main aim is to demonstrate how we could do things differently in tackling some of the challenges we face, like the climate crisis and poor sector productivity, by adopting innovative and more engineering-based solutions. And so my current clients include Energy Sprong, where I'm the part of the market development team for industrialising retrofit. And I'm also working with the Offsite Alliance as strategy and collaboration manager, and I support both of these organisations to help the offsite sector collectively tackle barriers to adopting offsite technologies. And I'm going to talk briefly about both of them today. Can I check that the presentation's moved on?
Yep.
Okay, so yes, we need to challenge the perceptions around offsite, and I think someone's already mentioned that. We need to debunk and demystify some of the perceptions so that we don't put up barriers to increasing the adoptions. And also basically we want to educate people so that we can move this forward at pace. And you know, these barriers around perceptions, timing, accreditations, and the adaptability of using MMC, they're all real problems. And some of the solutions to these lie within policy change, and some more rely on engineering-led responses. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on the latter. So how do we innovate, adapt and embrace modern methods of construction? And I'm going to talk obviously quickly about the DfMA Overlay, the part platforms and interoperability play, and the importance of collaboration and why we need to embrace a digital transformation. So just starting with the DfMA Overlay, and if you haven't come across it before, it stands for Design for Manufacturing and Assembly. And this document was first conceived in 2016, but was relaunched last year. And basically, I want to highlight that it shows the importance of early engagement of with the MMC ecosystem. So right from the outset, so those issues that people highlight of MMC solutions not being flexible enough, these can be overcome as long as the scheme is designed and procured with these types of solutions in mind. So this document is therefore a tool to address these barriers to adoption, and it was developed by a team of architects, engineers and policymakers. So it's probably a little bit too hard to read exactly what is on the screen, but just to highlight some of the orange boxes are examples of the key steps that the design team need to take. For example, considering how DfMA might impact a business case or the client requirements at stage 0, and undertaking research with manufacturers and the supply chain prior to the design commencing at stage 1, as well as assigning responsibilities at that stage. And then during the concept stage, how can we adopt strategic engineering aspects of MMC, like standardized floor-to-floor heights and spans, something that the previous speaker, I'm sure that would have been incorporated into their design. And at stage 3, where I know many of us know that that would be where we'd submit for planning, we already need to be considering the practical and logistical aspects of buildability and if the proposed systems have the required warranties. So hopefully you can see that this demonstrates that a client deciding to use MMC after planning permissions received is definitely far from optimum, and the benefits of MMC won't be realised if you take that route. So to chuck in another acronym, P, DfMA, and the P refers to platforms, and those in the development system, SMEs and the larger players, in particular architects, they should start to think about doing things, developing in terms of more configurable products and standardization, and another word that's already been mentioned, and products that enable manufacturers to address multiple markets will help move a shift towards platform-based development. And there is a genuine chicken and egg conundrum holding back mainstream adoption of MMC, because on the one hand, demand is inhibited by the low supply capacity, and on the other hand, suppliers are reluctant to increase capacity because of the uncertain constancy of the demand. So breaking this deadlock has apparently been too big a risk for industry on its own, and given the scale of and the foreseeable need of these fast approaching global challenges, and convinced of the case for DfMA, and MMC. The UK government has decided to intervene, and there is now therefore a presumption in favour of off-site construction for government works, and by developing and publicising their policies from the Construction Playbook and more recently the Platform Rulebook, hopefully this will help to provide the necessary catalyst to reach this critical mass of people adopting platforms. And interoperability has a role to play as well, and interoperability, if I can even say it, means the interface allowing it to work with other products, so components, assemblies or systems without any restrictions. So products can be transferred from one type of site or one system to another. And it probably sounds like a bit of a cliche and maybe obvious, but we can't underestimate that collaboration is absolutely essential if we want to deliver complex sites using MMC. And I don't think you can get more complex than the many millions of homes that we need to retrofit to reduce fuel bills, help those in fuel poverty and reduce our carbon emissions. And I mentioned already that the government has intervened, and a further way that they've done this, and something I think we need an awful lot more of, is investment in social housing decarbonisation. And Energy Sprong are involved in retrofit accelerators projects, and this is made possible through the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. And the Retrofit Accelerator for Homes Innovation Partnership, or RAHIP we call it, because the other one's a bit of a mouthful, we have a collaboration hub. And the aim of the collaboration hub is to bring registered providers of social housing together in order with together with solution providers, and they RPs will aggregate their demand so that we can assure the supply chain to develop off-site solutions. And what I mean is solutions like prefabricated insulated facades, insulated roofs with integrated solar panels, and prefabricated MEP modules. Now it's well publicised that off-site companies have struggled to be profitable, and obviously the reasons behind this are really complex. But one thing that's certainly gone wrong in the past is that companies have tended to develop their own MMC solutions, presuming that their products will meet the demands of the market, when really it needs to be client-led, because ultimately they're the ones who will be buying and sometimes maintaining these assets. So by bringing together the solution providers and these housing providers in this collaboration hub, we have started to deliver some real success. The supply chain are getting excited about the vast opportunities for off-site retrofit, or industrialised retrofit as we call it. And we've witnessed companies that are more used to competing with each other instead collaborating in order to meet their common goal of creating and building this market for off-site retrofit products and solutions. And the social housing providers are also benefiting because they're collaborating and overcoming the early stage challenges around planning, logistics, tenant interface, and when it comes to this delivery route via MMC solutions. And I'm also working with members of the Offsite Alliance. And if you haven't heard of the OA, it's a membership organisation for those working in the offsite sector. It's not just manufacturers, but the whole of the offsite ecosystems, from recruiters to training providers, the second tier supply chain, clients, and the warranty providers and others. Sorry.
Wonderful. Elle, can I get you to wrap up now? Is that all right?
Yeah, so we can't sit around and expect change to happen. We need to drive this change. And so we've got these strategic work streams. And one of the outcomes I've already introduced to you. So it's the DfMA Overlay, and it was in part a result of the hard work of the design integration work stream. So I don't have time to talk about digital adoption, which is what I thought might happen. But if you don't know, then digital adoption is absolutely key in order to overcome some of the challenges that we've got in adopting MMC.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elle. And I'm going to hand over, last but not least, to James. Please do introduce yourself and take it away.
Thanks very much, Jessie. My name is James Clark. I'm a managing associate at Womble Bond Dickinson, a full-service transatlantic law firm. I specialise in housing and infrastructure, but for a large part of my career, I focused on the house builder sector. And at Womble Bond Dickinson, as part of our Rebuild Britain campaign, we've looked extensively at MMC and how it can assist in sort of overcoming economic challenges. And for any that have not seen it, our report, MMC Fit for the Future, was published in January of this year. Moving to the planning system and the challenges that we currently face. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges is that only just over a third of local planning authorities have an up-to-date local plan. And I think many of those local plans were drafted at a time where MMC was not really thought about or considered. So I think a huge challenge is getting those plans up to date and removing some of the barriers to MMC that may exist within planning policies. So, for example, I've seen in practice planning policies that require local procurement, for example, of labour or materials that may be sort of incompatible with some of the sort of more volumetric types of MMC. I think there's a lot of perhaps learning that needs to be done on the part of local planning authorities. And I think that's a challenge at the moment because so many local planning authorities are severely under-resourced. So finding that capacity to do that learning, to build it into the local planning policy is going to be a huge challenge. And I think there's also an issue around for local planning authorities that perhaps don't have as much MMC capacity within their area. There may well be a reluctance where I think the first port of call that perhaps people think of is the modular construction, and then they may just see MMC as well actually losing some of the benefits of housing development. So some of those construction jobs go outside of their area to where some of these large factories are located. So I think there's some work to do around that and around understanding that MMC is not a product, it's a process, and it encompasses a wide spectrum, and how that that can be applicable to many different types of sites. Looking at sort of opportunities, really, I mean, I think for now at least, the government remains committed to delivering 300,000 new homes per year. Watch this space. Who knows? Who knows who the Prime Minister will be in a few months' time, and whether these things may change. But we've also got huge other issues in the planning system. So the issue of nutrient neutrality, for example, is delaying the granting of planning permissions in a wide number of areas in the country. So this pent-up demand and the target for delivery is something where I think MMC really lends itself in order to deliver at pace. We are seeing now some of the large volume house builders bringing forward MMC into their builds. So this is certainly gathering momentum. And I think as well, I think a lot of authorities are now paying more attention to sort of environmental, social and governance issues. Many have declared climate emergencies, but I think many are actually struggling to understand how they, having declared a climate emergency, as to how they then do something practically to sort of give effect to the those declarations that they've made. And mindful of time, just looking briefly to the future, I think there are some good opportunities in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, although a lot of detail is to be seen. But certainly the intention of the government is to streamline the local plan making process by lifting out some of the development control policies into a national development management policy, which should allow local plans to be more streamlined, more local in their scope. And the intention, whether they'll achieve it or not, is for local plans to be prepared, examined and adopted within 30 months, who knows, but any streamlining of the process will be welcome. And I think there is an opportunity for developers to work within that process to ensure that barriers to the adoption and deployment of MMC are removed from a planning policy perspective. But as I say, the under-resourcing of planning departments is going to be an issue, and I think there are no quick fixes to that. That's me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, James, and thank you so much to all our speakers. I, for one, have a ton of questions I've been making notes of as we've gone, because I think there's some really interesting things in there. But just bearing in mind the theme of this webinar is specifically around complex sites, MMC and planning, and the kind of overlap between those three things. And before I kind of delve in with all my various questions, I just wanted to give each of you sort of a chance to come back on anybody's points, anything that you've heard from any of the other speakers that you wanted to pick up on or take a little bit further or ask a question on. So I'm going to open the floor. Please do jump in if there are any particular comments or questions that you might have one for another.
I'll kick off, Jessie. I just wanted to say Richard's point about the mismatch between standardization and kind of not having too much uniformity, particularly interesting. And it relates to some of the points Gary, David, James, you've all made. There's this theme around the relationship with the kind of local planning teams and planners and how important that is. And so, yeah, I guess a question for, I'm not sure who in particular, but whether you can share how you do that as somebody, how you start to build those relationships when, of course, resourcing is so difficult within these committees and teams.
Gary, I think you are trying to say something, but you're on mute.
That's right. Took me a couple of clicks there. Yeah. So as the kind of the recipient of that kind of approach, or as the instigators of it, yeah, I think that early contact is essential. Really, I think we were lucky here in Bristol. We had the Bristol Housing Festival, so we were brought in on that very early. So we were hearing about MMC, you know, for a very early stage. We were tracking the various schemes as well, but not every single one. And I think myself and David, in different ways, have reflected upon that process as with regards to Bath Road, because I don't think Bath Road was ever on the list or very high profile on that list. It almost became an MMC scheme, and then, as I think David himself has said, you know, it became, I think the planners' expectations were for something, and then the actual practicalities of delivering the site in those very challenging circumstances was something else. But I think what that does is it gives an obligation on all parties, so developers, architects, but also us as planning authority, to ask much earlier in the process, so how are we going to build this thing then? You know, what are the inherent issues around it that we need to know about now, not work through now, but at least understand and actually tee something up at this stage that allows us to kind of go through right to the end of the process in a much more smoother way, really.
I think just adding to that, it's about early dialogue, isn't it? Is the point? We're doing 3 modular schemes with Bristol City Council at the moment, which were part of the Housing Festival. So I guess with that, they were known at a very early stage that they were going to be modular, and almost everything else they needed to work around it in terms of design and visual sort of appearance and the rest. So I suppose that constant was set very early on. I also think actually that if you look at funding, both Homes England and Welsh Government, there's a criteria now for MMC in order to garner funding. So that is known at a very early stage. So, you know, I suppose it's about setting those parameters early. And if that is a set parameter for funding and viability, then MMC then needs to happen in order to make that project happen. And what we're starting to see on certainly schemes where there's JVs between, I mean, we've got a client in Gloucester who's a housing association doing a JV with the local council. That process, very early on, again, Homes England involved as well. Everybody just bought in very early on as a key requirement of that project to make it happen. So I think it's early in the process and using it then as a key project requirement in order to feed stuff through.
I think this is really, really interesting, and particularly this sort of early engagement idea when it comes to MMC has been essential, particularly with, you mentioned, Richard, you mentioned the sites that we've been involved in with the Bristol Housing Festival, and there have been many others, Gary, that you mentioned, at different kind of MMC sites that have been coming through Bristol. Obviously, there was, within Bristol City, there was quite a lot of kind of deliberate piloting of MMC as part of the Bristol Housing Festival, and you've mentioned already that Dave's scheme on Bath Road kind of came through almost like a side door, in the sense that it wasn't initially going to be MMC and then it was MMC. And I suppose if we're moving forward and looking into the future, obviously we can't be piloting MMC all the time. So what is and kind of opening the floor up a little bit, and perhaps this is tying into the local plan that James is talking about, but what is the ideal way that we move this forward so that MMC can become, when it comes to planning specifically in complex sites, MMC can become part and parcel of the normal mode of operation, rather than needing to be something that is specially treated with a particular way? Does that make sense? Perhaps, Gary, I could come to you first, and then anyone else can chip in that might have a comment on that.
Yeah, I think MMC is absolutely here, and it's part of the future. I think it's both in terms of our local plan process, whether it's the current one or a speeded up process that we hear about every 5 years that never quite lands, but it's a process we got still. It is about removing those potential barriers to MMC, but also being on the front foot and talking about MMC and local plan policies and in terms of delivery. So, and it's kind of teeing up those more detailed development management policies on design, whether they are still within a local plan or within, obviously if they're within then a national policies, we've got less influence over that. But if we are in a position of retaining design policies, I think we've just got to have a keen eye on that MMC is going to be a key part of the delivery of the housing numbers required by the local plan, and to, you know, and things like we're just kind of in the early stages now of reflecting on the experience that we've had on MMC, but other developments as well. And, you know, the whole thing about a design intent statement document, whatever it is, as to try and kind of get to a level of agreement, but in a proportionate way at the permission stage, but then ensuring that there isn't any then misunderstandings, any further delays down the line, really. And so I think teeing up that kind of process, almost a kind of like mini design coding for individual development, could be something that we see in local plans going forward to, you know, help the delivery of MMC developments.
I was just going to add on that point, actually, that part of the proposals on the levelling up and regeneration bill is that all local authorities should have a design code as part of their planning policy suite. So I think if that can be brought forward in a way that is compatible with MMC, and therefore that expectation is built, as you know, Gary, you've said earlier, that expectation of MMC is sort of baked into the system from the start. It's not necessarily being prescriptive and saying it must be MMC, but it's mostly saying that everything is compatible with it, so that a developer isn't fighting against policy in order to bring a site forward as an MMC project. I think that could be very, very useful, and I think that there is this transition period to work through now in order to get to that sort of new system.
And Elle, you talked about the kind of platform and standardization when it comes to MMC systems at all. Do you think that that's sort of the aim to standardize, to build platform systems, do you think that will help with this process? Do you think it aids this idea of actually being able to help with planning, or do you think that's just got to be something that happens anyway and planning will do its own thing on its side?
I think that standardisation is happening because people are starting to realise the benefits of standardising. In terms of planning, I think people have got this misconception that by using MMC, you can't you can't have lots of different iterations of the building. It looks as it looks, but that's certainly not the case, because platform approaches mean that there's multiple peripheries which can be attached to the core asset, and it means that you can have lots of different finishes of different configurations, and so we're misguided if we think that using platforms will mean that we have restrictions in our planning. And I was just going to touch on, in terms of policy, that the sustainability, I think, is going to drive us towards more platform approaches and the use of MMC more as well. And I think that my observation, within the last couple of years, is that more are being attracted to benefits of MMC, and these voices are sort of increasingly putting sustainability at the heart of the argument. And the strides that we're making in developing offsite construction techniques that have real carbon benefit, and these construction techniques are inherently more suitable for achieving this enhanced thermal performance and better airtightness and low embodied carbon materials in a more efficient way. The use of energy regulations are going to push this even further. So the MMC industry is really well placed to make a major contribution towards this low carbon future. And that's what drew me to MMC in the first place, actually. So I think as policy changes and we're increasingly being asked to deliver more sustainable buildings, that is what's going to drive us more towards the use of MMC.
That's really helpful. Dave, I want to come to you because, hindsight is a perfect vision. If you could go back and look at your complex site that is using MMC, how would you want to have seen an engagement with the planning process, or what would you have done differently, or what would you have had other people do differently when it comes to that particular site and planning being an example of a complex site?
Okay, so Bathrow, we inherited this site with 34 pre-commencement conditions. So that's quite a challenge, especially through the beginning of COVID. This was quite difficult because it was one property developer that switched it to rather late to another one. So we had an external facade. However, we had room types which we had to fit into the facade and the external elements, which was very, very difficult to do. So standardization had to be adopted. So the use of concrete cross walls included with the structural and sort of stability of a building had to tie into the external envelope and appearance of a building, which we did quite well. So early engagement with planners is paramount. Before anybody, an architect puts a line on a paper, somebody needs to do a feasibility and say, look, this is what we're going to target. This is how it can be built. Because otherwise, I'm looking at another scheme in Bristol further down on the Avon, which an architect's drawn it, brought it to me, and I've ripped it up, put it in the bin, so you just can't build it. It cannot be delivered. You're taking this to the planning authority who are going to make an opinion of what we want to see, but you can't actually deliver it. So that's the engagement piece. It's almost you decide what you're going to do before your architectural phase, and then you build it up from there, out of a section of components and deliveries, and how it's going to have less impact on the neighbouring communities as well, and the deliverability. So they're all things that I think that could have been worked a lot better on Bath Road. Definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I am very aware of time, and we've almost only just felt like we're beginning to get into some of the conversation on this, and I have raced through some of my particular questions to try and get a little bit more out of the conversation. But I'm going to do a little bit of a wrap up, but before I do, I just want to pose a kind of final question to all of you, and I'll come to each of you in turn. But essentially, in 20 to 30 seconds, I'd love to know either you're thinking about the future when it comes to planning, complex sites, and MMC. What's the one piece of information or educational piece of advice you would want to be made known to everybody within the development cycle when it comes to planning, MMC, and complex sites? Your one sort of tidbit, your best piece of information that if you could have it as known as far and wide as possible, what would it be? But while you're thinking on that, I want to just thank you, everybody that has been watching this or will watch this in the future. If you do have any more questions about the Workforce for the Future project, please do get in touch with us. Do check out the website. There is a series of webinars that we've been producing as part of this program, and you can find them all on our YouTube. There's also a series of site visits that are going on, and there's a few more coming up soon, so do check out the Bristol Housing Festival website for that, or follow up with YTKO, who are the program leads for Workforce for the Future, or this particular part of Workforce for the Future, who will be able to link you in with all the other available bits and pieces that's part of that program. But to wrap up, and literally 20 or 30 seconds from each of you, I'm going to come around to each of you in turn, your one piece of key information when it comes to planning, complex sites, and MMC. Trina, I'm going to come to you first.
Be prepared to challenge your assumptions, and also, not unlike cost when it comes to MMC, be prepared to put a bit more up front, getting everyone around the table, because if you do the early engagement up front, it's going to make everything easier down the line.
Brilliant, thank you. And Richard?
Fortunately, probably the same, actually. I think the engagement piece is the thing, and working through with suppliers very, very early on and testing viability, whether it's looking at orientation of PV panels with sort of panelized systems and all the rest of it, all the detail stuff. I think if you can do that sooner, you save yourself a whole lot of grief. And as I say, I think the message as well is that MMC is inextricably linked to zero carbon. So I think we're kidding ourselves if we think otherwise on that as well.
Brilliant. And James?
On the same vein, but I would say that MMC is the future direction of travel. I think we've seen sort of on this call today that there's a huge amount of expertise within the industry, and I think it's very important that developers and professionals engage with local planning authorities in their plan making process to help them to develop their policies for the future so that they're fit for purpose.
And Dave?
Correct selection of the MMC product for a project. You can easily get derailed by shoehorning something MMC that doesn't suit the project. So that's one piece I would take.
That's good. And over to Elle.
Yeah, I would say that there's this perceived conflict between local employment and using MMC solutions, i.e. it's one or the other. And I think this can be overcome using distributed manufacturing, which means that some manufacturing takes place at a hub factory. That might be in Hull, for example, and then you can then have more local manufacturing and assembly, thus providing employment and opportunity, and obviously, importantly, keeping social economic benefits local. So it's one to look out for, and I think the direction of travel for MMC.
Perfect. And last but not least, Gary.
Thanks, Jessie. Yeah, I think I've spent most of my career thinking that how a development is built isn't necessarily something that the planning system should get involved with. I think my experience over the last 2 to 3 years about MMC and other development is that you should be asking that question at the outset, really. Yeah, nice design. How are you going to build it? And what does that mean for the design that you're asking us to approve?
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to each of our speakers. This has been a really, really interesting conversation, and I look forward to working with each of you further in the future. Thank you so much for watching, if you are watching, and we hope to engage with you in some way or another in the future as well.